Welcome everyone to the very first episode of the Tribe Talk live video podcast. I am your co-host Thomas. I got my main man with me, your other co-host Cliff, and of course this week's special guest Roger Hallam. And every Friday evening we hope to bring you someone new, people who are a real force in their own field. Our intention with this show is to give you, the people, something of value, but equally importantly, someone of value. We can't tell you how grateful we are for all of you tuning in, so relax, get comfortable, keep those ears open, and listen to the tribe do the talking.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks everybody who's tuning in. This is our first edition of Tribe Talk, and it's an absolute pleasure tonight to introduce this guy to you. Many of you all know him, know who he is. But for those of you who don't, Roger Hallam is a co-founder of Extinction Rebellion and a leader of the anti-political party Burning Pink. He was a mechanic farmer in Wales turned prize-winning academic who applied his social scientific research to developing the radical tactics and strategy for this new climate change movement. And his message for everyone is simple: think on it, but then act. Join the rebellion. Let's get to it. So let's get to it. Roger, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you, sir?
I'm all right, thanks. I'm all right. You've got a bit of an echo there. I don't know if that's me.
You might need to turn your sound down a little bit on your computer, maybe.
Or is it me? Right.
I think so. You're okay?
Yeah.
We good now?
Yeah. That's all good.
Okay, we'll love it. So give us a wee bit of orientation first, Roger. Whereabouts are you tonight? Are you in Wales or London, or where are you talking to us from?
Yeah. I spend most of my time in London nowadays. Have done for the last few years, but yeah, I'm still a Welsh farmer at heart, as you might say. So I'm there most weekends or every other weekend, something like that.
Cool. Strange times with everyone on lockdown in a minute. Yeah. Thomas, do you want to kick this off?
Yeah, I guess so. On that note, man, you want to tell us a little bit about your life as a vegetable farmer before everything came to be?
Well, I'm from Stockport in the north of England, and so I was there for 18 years. And I suppose I had my big wake-up moment in the peace movement in the 1980s, like a lot of people in my generation. So when I was about 14 or 15, I realised there was a plan to blow the world up, which I wasn't over impressed by and haven't been impressed since. So as a teenager, I was very keen running around showing films and getting myself into trouble and sitting down in the centre of Manchester. It was very exciting, as you can imagine, when you're 17. And then I went down to London, studying in London, and to cut a long story short, I was involved quite heavily in the peace movement, got arrested a lot and went to prison and such like, and then I moved more into housing co-ops and workers co-ops and how to encourage people to participate in organisations. And then when I was 29, I sort of gave it up and went to Wales to grow carrots.
Wow.
So that was sort of interesting, a lot of hard work, but I was sort of aware of the climate crisis, like a lot of people in the 90s. You know, it's sort of a bit of that's a bit of a problem. I'm sure someone will sort that one out. And then I think it's 2006, it rained every day for 7 weeks in Wales. I think it did over most of the UK.
Yeah, I remember it well.
15 acres of vegetables I had all rotted in the ground. So it was a little bit, well, it wasn't a little bit, it was highly, highly stressful. And lots of people lost their jobs and I lost a lot of money. And then I think it did the same the following year. And then since then, you know, if you're a farmer, you know this, the weather's just been all over the place, you know, hottest spring and dullest August and hottest, coldest winter on record we had. I lost all my winter crops. So if you're a farmer, particularly if you're growing vegetables, well, to be honest with you, whatever sort of farmer you are, you're sort of pulling your hair out going, what sort of weather are we going to get this year? Because every 2 or 3 years, there's some sort of 1 in 1,000 year event. And this is all around the world, as you probably know. So for me, like, it was literally on the front line because there's not much between my bottom line of my business and what's happening in the sky. And what's happening in the sky is the climate. So anyway, I ended up going to King's College and sort of rekindling my interest in a sort of systematic study of how to cause trouble effectively, as the joke is.
Love it.
I didn't have that on my application form. I put some with lots of long Latin words, but yeah, these universities are like, they always love their words. So I'm very good at giving you long words if you want me to say something with long words.
I'm more than happy. I'm a bit of a word nerd myself.
I'm not too sure I'll understand them, Roger.
I didn't spend much of my time in King's College. I was like, mainly doing field work, which is basically going around different campaigns, radical trade unions and sort of rent unions and things, working out how to mobilise people to do collective action to improve their lives. And we helped organise the first rent strike for decades in London and organised migrant workers to get wage increases. So it's very much a similar sort of thing, how to mobilise people and encourage them and make them feel welcome, and appreciated and all that stuff. And that's the bedrock of changing the world as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, and then, help set up XR and the rest was history.
It's remarkable that you've pretty much since you were able to at a young age, you've always been doing this stuff. Just learning that about you now, it's fascinating. It seems you're made for it.
Yeah. Well, I sort of blame my mum really, because she was a Methodist lay preacher. If you know anything about Methodists in northwest England, at least traditionally, they were a bit moralistic. Let's put it like that. So for my mother, it was a bit like everything's right or wrong, and for better or worse. And also she spent all her time doing charity work. She was one of those church women that never always wants to get a tenner out of you or something for some. So she sort of taught me the gift of the gab, as you might say, of how to get people to do stuff. So I sort of have it in my blood a bit. But yeah, I have been organising people just about every week and since for the last 35 years. So that's what I do, is I organise people and get them on the go. And obviously that was a big basis for the Extinction Rebellion situation. Yeah.
Wow.
What was the catalyst then for Extinction Rebellion? Was it that moment when you lost your crops, or?
Well, as I said in the film, I think you might be talking about the film in Troublemaker. It's a little bit of a cliche, isn't it, of having organic farmer gets done in by the weather, decides to take down the system. It's a bit. It's not quite like that, if the truth be known, but obviously. I can't emphasize this enough. If you're a farmer, and particularly if you grow vegetables, you're extremely dependent upon the weather. So it makes you realize how totally vulnerable we are. And it makes you realize the climate crisis is totally real, because you're looking at it all day. So, like most people go to the supermarket and, there's stuff on the shelves, and then they don't really start realizing what's going on until COVID hits or something, and there's no pasta, So that's really what I've been expecting for 10, 15 years, and many other people that are on the front line with it. Basically, if the weather's shit, you can't grow food. There's no food. The supermarket doesn't have the food, and people starve. It's not complicated. It really is not complicated. It's a bit emotionally horrific, but it's not complicated. And so I forgot what you asked me now. I went off on a tangent.
The catalyst for Extinction Rebellion. When was the moment you thought?
Well, it's sort of about it? The whole climate thing. Loads of people, it's a bit like when you first heard of the Beatles or something, isn't it? You can't really remember when you remember significant things, So I must have heard about it some way, but definitely by 2005, up to 2009, 10, I was definitely thinking, oh my God, this is massive, this is the whole world. So when I got to King's College, I was sort of, to be honest, I was in a little bit of denial, like a lot of people, because, if you get involved in this stuff, you can't really reverse out of it, because you're going to know it forever. So, and it is a massive thing. So I think in some ways I was a bit resistant, and I was sort of making my way up to doing something. But I did end up talking to a bunch of climate activists, and I said to them, this whole thing is systemic. You're not going to sort out the climate crisis without a world revolution, basically. So and it wasn't trying to be all impressive or rhetorical. I just think, I'm a social scientist, so you asked me for my opinion, and that's what it is. So that's that led to the setting up a Rising Up, and the idea always at the back of my mind is we're going to, be dealing with the climate crisis. And then in 2018, in January, I did a sort of presentation called Pivoting to the Real Issue. And that led to the whole of Rising Up, this network of activists getting together and going, right, we're going to organise a rebellion against the British government. And, that was a little bit of a silly idea, but,
Personally, I think it's a great idea, so...
I guess on that, like for the people watching, it goes into if you could talk a bit about the science and what you were learning about and how that like evidences the climate emergency that we're in.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you've asked me, because going to a lot of interviews and they go, well, we all know about the climate science, and then they go on about why they don't have to do anything. It's really annoying, because it's understandable, because you've had the climate crisis with us for 30 years, right? I mean, people were talking about it in the 90s. One of my best mates was climbing up trees in 1995 about the climate crisis, believe it or not. So wow. It's been there for a long time. And of course, what most people do is in their heads, they've got it in their heads, but they've got it in their heads about what it was 15 years ago. Or 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. But in 2021, it's a completely different kettle of fish than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it was a matter of, let's have some legislation, tax carbon a bit, have a little lifestyle campaign, get people not to eat so much meat, and it will be sort of okay, right? And arguably it would have been. But it's a bit, without sounding too dramatic, it's a bit like cancer or something, right? You don't get it checked out, and you don't do something, and then it gets exponentially worse. And the fact of the matter is in 2001, the situation's beyond something beginning with F, as I'm on record for saying, right? It's catastrophically awful, and the reason for that is 30 years ago, the scientists said to the world community, you can't go over 1 degree centigrade, otherwise terrible things are going to happen. And I'll tell you what those terrible things are in a minute. But in 2020, it went to 1.3. So it's going up exponentially, and it used to be 1, and then it was 0.8 and what have you. And the other thing is, between 2010 and 2020, it went up by 0.3. So it's going up exponentially. So you don't need to be a genius to add, 1.3 to 0.3. That makes 1.6. Have I got that right? So basically, we're going over 1.5 degrees in the next 5 to 10 years. Now, this is the speed of a bullet, right? In terms of climate change, traditionally, it's not climate change. It's climate change at the rate of a bullet. You see what I mean? This shouldn't be happening. This should be happening over centuries, not over 10 years. So the thing that usually leaves people cold is they go, okay, so that's 1.6, so what? So it's important to understand what that means. So 1.6 basically is the world average temperature. It's not what it is in the center of Ireland or, in France or whatever. You have to double it. So then you're like saying, okay, so on an average day, it's going to be 3 degrees warmer than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, okay? That's what it's going to be like. And then the next thing to consider, and this is where it gets scary, is that's on an average day, right? So there's this complicated thing called a normal distribution curve. But what it means is, as we all know, right, we've just had a cold patch, haven't we, recently. So that's not the average winter temperature. That's like, -5 or 10 more than it should. But if it's 3 degrees over on a normal time, it means a lot of the time it's going to be 10 to 20 degrees hotter. Now, if the temperature goes over 30 degrees centigrade, as a farmer, I can tell you this, like, you can't actually grow anything. In other words, it's too hot to grow anything. So what you're saying is if you're growing a crop, you need to have semi-decent weather for the 3 or 4 months that you're growing that crop. So you start working out the maths here, right? It's a bit like playing Russian roulette. There used to be, 10 barrels in the gun and you had, 1, and now it's 3. And then you've got to press the bullet, you've got to press the button the trigger every week. You see what I mean? Because you only need to have 3 or 4 weeks when it's super hot and you've lost the crop. So if you consider that, then you're saying like 1 year and 2, there's going to be major crop failure. You see how you work that out, right? If you've got an allotment, you know this. You've got to have nice, it doesn't matter if the weather's really nice 9/10 of the time. If in 1 week suddenly there's a frost, that's it. You've lost your new potatoes, right? So it's the same like with the world's climate. You only need 3 or 4 weeks of, 40 degrees centigrade in the UK. And that's it. The farmers are getting out of business and you're going to have shortages on the supermarket. And the other thing to consider is that the ice in the Arctic is melting. Now it's confirmed by 2030, 2035. And what that does is what's happened in Texas. I don't know if people have seen that, but there's been snow in Texas. Yeah, and this is like everyone's freezing to death or whatever. It's just like unknown. And the reason for that is because all the cold air in the Arctic basically stays there because it's a lot colder than the weather in the equator. This is a little bit complicated, but the upshot of it is as the Arctic warms up, basically the cold weather from the Arctic starts meandering down into France and Morocco or down into southern United States, where it never did before. And the other side of the equation is lots of hot air goes up into the Arctic and warms the Arctic even more. And what that means is what's called weather blocking, because these weather systems move a lot slower. So again, like, if you're growing your new potatoes, I'm sure some people in Northern Ireland are doing this, it's a bit of a tradition, isn't it, right?
Lots of people do.
Right? Basically, you know what you want. You want to have a bit of rain, a bit of sun, a bit of rain, a bit of sun. Now, if you just have loads of rain, it's going to rot. Or if you have loads of sun, it's going to dry out and you don't get a crop. So what weather blocking does, these weather systems, instead of moving rapidly around the globe, you basically get loads of rain and no sun for weeks. And then you get loads of sun just for weeks. You see how it works?
Yeah.
And then you're going to lose your crop. So what this means, I'm trying to be technical about it because, I'm sure people listening thinking, well, climate change is quite abstract. But this is what it really means, right? Is you can't grow food. I mean, there's loads of other things going on, but this is the real deal. Because when you can't grow food, it's going to be COVID times 100, right? You're going to go into the supermarket and there isn't going to be stuff there. This has happened many times in human history. There's nothing unusual about it. And once you get people not being able to get food, then all hell breaks loose. And you've got all the problems with social collapse. You can go to Egypt or Somalia and you can see how this works, right? So this is hell coming down the road. That's what it's saying. Because you can have as much technology as you like and as much money as you like, but if you haven't got food to eat, who gives a damn, right? You see what I mean? So this is the real thing. And it means that every other issue in society is dependent upon this foundation. So it's not like, the social equality, there's, pollution, there's these different things, and then there's climate change. No, it's like climate change is the table on which society rests. So all the issues are on the top of the table. But if you cut the legs off the table, right, the table collapses and everything on the table crashes. You see, this is what people need to get into their head, right? This isn't a labor dispute. It's not a civil rights issue. It's the whole damn thing. Because once you've got social collapse, everyone's rights are going to collapse as well. Because that's what happens when you get social collapse, right? People get angry and they start killing each other. It's not pleasant. And that's the situation. So we've got 200 years of progress, since the French Revolution or whatever, when people woke up to treating people decently or trying to, all that's going to go in the next 5 years. 200 years of struggle, blood, sweat, of tears, of radical people getting on with the job. And they're all like, rolling in their graves, aren't they? Because they're going, what are these guys doing? They're just going to throw it away in the next decade. So that's it. It's like, I should be using lots of swear words, but I won't.
No, you can go ahead. I'm not obviously on swear word myself. I heard somebody describe what we're doing in a minute is rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. So it's not a good picture, Roger. Do you think the climate crisis is too complicated for the ordinary person to understand? And should we leave it in the hands of politicians and scientists to sort this out, or what's the way forward?
So you might think I'm being a bit radical, political, ideological here, but I'm not. I'm just being like, the research I did and my experience in Extinction Rebellion over the last 2 years is the richer and more educated you are, the less likely you are to do something about the climate. And the reason for that is because people have got skin in the game, right? People that are well off and quite privileged don't want to know that, the system's going to destroy the next generation. They just can't get their head around it. And also a lot of people that are quite well off, and you probably noticed this, have this really naive idea that everything's always going to get better. Well, if which is just the maddest idea if you think about it. It's like, living standards are going to go up and blah, blah, blah. Well, if you're lower middle class or working class, that's bullshit, right? Because the last 30 years has been shit for most people, and people have lost their communities, they've lost things through austerity, and they just don't believe in that anymore. And so when the climate situation comes along, it's a lot easier for them to understand because they already know that the system is out to get them. And this is the system out to get you, times 1,000. So this is the big change, I think, with Extinction Rebellion. Is instead of staying within that nice clique of urban middle class people, who are all cool, of course, right? But, we need to get out and talk to average people, because this isn't an environmental issue anymore. This is the big thing I'm trying to get across to people, right? It's not, it's not saving rabbits or penguins or, there's a river that's got a bit of a problem, or clearing litter off of the beach. I'm not belittling, right, those things. I've been in the environmental movement since I was 15. I think those things are important. But this is nothing to do with the environment. What this is about is political corruption, right? It's the political class deciding that the profits of the corporate elite are more important than our children's lives. That's the bottom line. And elites all through history make that decision that they'd rather have people die than, question their own power. So again, there's nothing like, this is a bit of a shock to lots of, naive middle class people, but there's plenty of people in Britain get this, right? I mean, 80% of the population have no trust in politicians. So it's not like we're saying anything new. We're just saying it's just 10 times worse than you thought it was, because there's this plan basically to completely mess everything up over the next 10 to 20 years. And, bear in mind, it's going to be like that for the next 10,000 or even 10 million years, right? This is a cliff face. I mean, the more you think about it, the more it just does your head in, It's terrible. It lasts forever, and it affects everyone in the world. I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you?
Roger, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm going to say it for you. The system is completely fucked, and we need a new system right away. I totally agree with you. Do you have another question for Roger?
Yeah. I think when people hear, us talking about degrees and talk about 1.6 degrees and whatever, to people that sounds like nothing. It's just a couple of degrees. But on that note, why do you think people fail to grasp how serious that is? Do you think it's like a socially engineered ignorance, or how do you think it comes to be that people are just blasé in the face of it?
Well, it's a complicated issue, right? So the first thing to understand about people is they're really different. So, some people are super sensitive, some people are psychopaths, some people are really busy and other people aren't. There's all sorts of different sorts of people. So, if we're looking at why people in general aren't responding, the easy answer is people generally don't respond in general anyway to anything, and never really did, and probably never will, right? Because most people have their own lives, right? They're looking after their kids, they're on Facebook, they're watching Netflix. For better or worse, that's how most people are. and you're not going to change that. You know, I mean, they might come out on the streets, you know, once 100 years, you know, if something really bad happens. But generally speaking, they're living their own lives, and I'm not necessarily knocking that. Politics isn't everything, you know, and people. It doesn't mean they're bad people, but for various reasons, they're not going to be on the case, right? But that doesn't really matter. What matters is that those people get an understanding that something's up. The people that are actually going to change things are usually like 1 to 3% of the population. And that's, you know, one of the big things Extinction Rebellion, you may know, is that research that says even when there's big revolutions, most people are still like sitting at home, you know, playing cards, right? You know, you see what I mean? You know, you have that image of the people going to the streets, you know, and everyone's, it's bollocks, right? Most people are at home just going, yeah, we'll just let them get on with it and come out when it's safe, you know. That's how it works. That's how it is. So what we need to focus on is mobilizing the 3% of people. And those are all different sorts of people, you know. They might be quite well off and they've got a real conscience about them, or they might be sort of religious and sort of conservative in it with a small c way, but they've got a strong sense of duty towards their children, or you know, religious orientation. Or they might be young people that are really pissed off, or they might be, you know, people that are already really radical. In other words, there's loads of different people to mobilize. And the main thing here that mobilizes people is getting in front of them and having that 15-20 minutes to explain what 1.3 means, right? There's no point trying to do that down the pub in 3 minutes. You've got to get people in the room and say, look, this is it. In the same way as, you know, you've got a lump in your body and you're thinking, oh, it's just a lump, right? You basically need to sit in front of the doctor for 15 minutes while he shows you the x-rays. And about 10 minutes in, you're going, you know, that's it. You know, I've got it. You know, but it takes that much time. So it's the same with the climate crisis. I mean, you know, it's a terrible thing to say, so I really apologize to everyone on a Friday night. You know, I'm not quite a cheerful guy, as you probably noticed, but the fact of the matter is, this is what it is, right? And that's, you know, I'm from Stockport, and you call a spade where I'm coming from. I think it's the same in Northern Ireland, you know.
It's the same here.
If something's up, you talk about it, right? There's no point, you know, sweeping on the carpet. This is beyond imaginably bad, the situation, because it's going to destroy the whole of the globe's climate and make it enormously difficult to grow food. And it's going to go on forever, and it's going to get worse and worse. You know, you couldn't make it up, as I said. So you've got to have that 15 minutes in the heading for extinction talk that Extinction Rebellion does. And that's happened thousands of times, you know, and within 20 minutes, people are in tears because they sort of know it's bad. And then they realize it's beyond bad. And that's, you know, it's a grieving situation, because we've all been, to varying extents, brought up to think everything's pretty okay. You know, we're not going to get annihilated. You know, that's what happened in World War II. And then suddenly, crash, you're looking at a World War II situation again, which is millions of people are going to die and there's going to be chaos. So that's a big shock. And that's, you know, that's really what we discovered in the early days of XR, is when you tell that to people, some people will disappear and stick their heads in the sand, right? And at the same time, and this is important, and at the same time, about a third of the people will step up. They'll go, okay, I'm man enough to deal with this. I'm not going to be stupid enough to stick my head in the sand. I've got a sense of duty and honor and all the rest of it. You know, I know who I am, and I don't stand aside and let this happen. And those are the people that change the world, right? And you need, you know, 50,000 of them, and then you're on the home straights.
On the streets is the problem.
Organize, say, 10,000 from Northern Ireland, you'll get your cosmic brownie points or something, or, you know, God will look nicely on you, or whatever your belief system is. But, you know, that, I mean, I'm not messing around here. You know, I'm a scholar on this. It doesn't actually take a lot of people to change the world, but those people have to be organized, and they have to be prepared to break the law, or at least, or rather uphold the law, as you might say, right? And this is, you know, where we get onto civil disobedience. There's no point those 10,000 people going to Belfast and, you know, waving a few flags for the day and going home and feeling good about themselves, right? I mean, that's all very good if you want to feel good about yourself. But if you want to be honest about what's going to change this, you know, create this economic revolution that everyone agrees has to happen, then you're going to have to do a massive amount of disruption. I mean, you know, it's not like, don't get me wrong, you know, it's not like thousands of people going to get shot or something like in the global south. But it's not. People will have to get arrested and will go to jail. And this is the British tradition, right? People have been doing this sort of stuff for hundreds of years. So it's not like unknown. You know, all the people, when I was a teenager, I was with people that, you know, had been involved in the civil rights movement, had gone to fight in Spain in the 30s. So, you know, this is what we're part of. You know, we know that's what we're part of.
Yeah, but Thomas and I were at the rebellion in the fall of 2019, and I remember asking at the time, "Where's Roger?" But I think you actually were inside at the time. I think you'd been arrested at that point in the proceedings and missed the whole thing. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to have a bit of a holiday while all you were working hard. I could just watch you on telly. I watched the whole rebellion on Channel 5. I don't know if you watch Channel 5, but it's not that hot analysis.
So Roger, I have a question from somebody who's watching in, and also, well, a question from me, and it kind of tails onto the other ones. I was going to ask you, is it possible to make change in a capitalist society? Can we get to net zero carbon emissions in capitalist society? And this question from somebody who's Robin, who's watching in, he wants to know what you would do if you were in charge.
My favourite question.
Controversial.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, I should say, you know, I'm sure you do this. You have some guests on, and they've got a specialist area, and they're quite good on the specialist area. And then you ask them a general question, and they just talk bollocks. So, I have a bit of a disclaimer, right? You know, I'm not God or anything, you know, far from it, of course. I mean, I know how to mobilize people. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm an expert in geoengineering. You see what I mean? So you've got me on to talk about that. And that's primarily what I can talk about. So, you know, when I'm talking about capitalism, that's more like my personal view. Obviously, it's fairly informed because I study radical political change. But that's not, you know, I haven't read Das Kapital or anything, unfortunately. Anyway, the upshot of it is what I'm involved in, the orientation I have is on the practicalities of creating political disruption and then seeing how far you can get. So I'm not sort of making a big plan of exactly how bad capitalism is or how we get rid of it or what bit of it's going to remain, right? What I'm in the business of doing is creating the potential for something like that to happen. And it's really for other people to analyze like the extent to which you need to get rid of capitalism. And I'm constructing it like that because as a practical designer, for me, like binaries aren't very helpful. In other words, do we have capitalism or don't we, right? That's a pretty like dumb question in a way. You know, what we need to be asking is what is the state going to take over? How is it going to organize taking over industry? And what elements of the market are still going to exist? You know what I mean? So if you're a small farmer in Derry or something, right, and you're going to be taking your milk, you know, to the local town, who gives a damn, right? You're hardly corporate capitalism. So something like that still, you know, that sort of way of life still needs to be respected as far as I'm concerned, or at least it's not, you know, top on my list. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the corporate dominance of society, I think everyone agrees it's a no-brainer that has to go, right? Because the climate crisis has to be dealt with. These people need to be taxed. Their industries need to be taken over. And what we're really looking at, and this isn't a big political or radical point, what we're really looking at is something along the lines of a World War II mobilization of the economy, right? And right-wing people say that, you know, technocratic people say that, and left-wing people say that. And the reason they say it is because there's no other way of reorganizing the transition to a zero carbon economy in 5 to 10 years without that sort of crisis management. And, you know, it's a bit, and we've seen this in COVID, haven't we? You know, no one, even in the Conservative Party, people are accepting that half the country is getting money from the government. Well, that's socialism by default, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So in other words, my orientation on this is capitalism has basically destroyed itself already. You know, whether you like it or not, you know, there's still going to inevitably be a place for small scale trading. But in terms of, you know, the main parts of the economy, they're going to have to be changed through government legislation. And as in World War II, the captains of industry are going to be told, you've got to do this, otherwise you're going to prison. And that's how it works in a crisis, right? In the same way as you've got to close your pubs, otherwise you can get fined. You know, this is serious stuff. And once people wake up to it, of course, they're going to be prepared to do that, because the alternative is going to be, you know, beyond the description bad. So for me, it's pretty obvious what's coming down the road if we're going to survive, which is, you know, a state-directed economy. And that covers a multitude of sins, you know, in terms of the degree of democracy you can have. The other thing to say is the big innovation that Extinction Rebellion is proposing, as you may know, is citizens' assemblies. So instead of having some, you know, far left Leninist cult sort of running up, as it were, the idea is people themselves decide this is a good idea. And the citizens' assembly, this is the sort of revolutionary element of it, is for the first time in history, everyone will be represented because people will be selected randomly. Yeah. So, you know, it will be a bus driver from Belfast, or, you know, a farmer from Derry, or whatever it is, right? And the 1% richest part of the population will only have 1% representation, which is about as radical as you can get, right? And the beauty of it is not only will ordinary people be deciding things, but they'll be seen to be deciding it. In other words, when you come on the steps of Parliament, there will be ordinary people. So this is a massive, massive change. And the great thing about it, of course, is you don't need to be a genius to work out that if ordinary people get to know about the climate crisis, they're going to want something happening damn quick, because they're not going to be receiving money from the corporate class. So that's the plan. And I think that will be the handmaiden to what you might call a democratic, egalitarian transition, which is coming down the road. So, you know, that goes on to the second question, which is what I want to see happen. Is that right? What
would you do if you were in charge? You're not allowed to shoot.
So I'm going to get into trouble on this one. But, yeah. Well, the first thing to say really is that I've spent my life like being involved in radical politics and working out how to deal without that sort of nasty dictator hierarchy sort of situation, you know, where everyone feels valued and everyone can participate in producing whatever a group does. So I wouldn't surprise you, I suppose, if I was to say I wouldn't be the dictator. So what the first thing I'd do is basically create a citizens' assembly system, right? Because even if I was going to say, you know, great things were going to happen, people would get really pissed off because it's Roger Hallam telling them to do stuff. You see what I mean? So the smart thing to do is not to have power, in my view. The smart thing to do is to design people power, because as a Democrat, that's what I've got faith in, is ordinary people making common sense decisions, which, you know, rich and powerful people can't get their act together to do. So for me, like, that would be what I would create. And I think through that, you'll get a humanized transition. I don't think anyone can pretend it's going to be easy. You know, potentially we're going back to World War II. But in World War II, life didn't collapse, you know. It was okay. You know, you had enough to eat, you had community, you had relationships, you had your culture. You know, it was tough, but it was okay. So that's really the sort of society we're going back to. And it's not necessarily worse than the one today, after all. You know, 10 or 20 people are depressed all the time and all the rest of it, right? So it's not, you know, we don't want to get too arrogant about how amazing our society is, do we? So, you know, but for me, like, there's everything to play for, right? this doesn't have to be a descent in some sort of fascistic nightmare. If people get it together and stand up together and engage in civil disobedience, then get the citizens' assemblies, make them legally binding, then you could see a massive resurgence of community solidarity, you know, like there was in the days of the past. And that has to be a really good thing, you know.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me, Roger. It's just I can see that the elites might not like the idea too much.
The elites, yeah.
So they're going to be a massive problem. But like I say, Citizens' Assembly, we took part in some in London, and they're an absolutely brilliant way of making decisions.
Fascinating process.
Yeah, well, what I'd like to say, and you know, obviously a lot of what I'm saying is pretty miserable, so I'll say something that's quite optimistic, and you might not believe me, but you know, in the work that I do on how radical political change works, and you know, again, this isn't political work, you know, you're just observing from history and case studies. One of the things that needs to be understood is if society rapidly enters into a crisis, a bit like COVID or a food crisis, then people can radicalize in a matter of days and weeks, right? Particularly when they're generally pissed off anyway, like people are in Western society. So I think I'm very optimistic, actually, that in democratic societies where people have a culture of standing up for their rights, you know, in a limited way, but, you know, we do compared with some countries in the world, people won't stand for it, right? People will come to the point, that 3% that we're talking about, right? They will come to the point where they're going, we're not doing this anymore, and we're going on the street, and we will have a democratic transition, and the elites will be brought to heel, as they were in the past. You know, it's not impossible. Don't get this defeatist left idea, you know, the elites are all powerful and they're global and there's nothing you can do about it, and all we can do is be miserable and wait to die in our bedsits or something, right? That's total bollocks. It's entirely possible to bring the elites into line, and it's totally possible to create an egalitarian society. What it requires is consistent collective action, and that will be coming down the road. So I think in democratic Western societies, there is a good chance, right? There is a good chance that we'll see something that we can be proud of, you know, despite everything that's coming down the line. And, you know, main thing is to get off your bum.
And do something.
What about then mass participation and the non-violent civil disobedience? Because that's basically what is that going for the Citizens' Assembly? Will we advocate for that to go in that direction? Would that be correct?
You're asking what civil disobedience and non-violence and stuff, did you say? Sorry.
Yeah, and how that paves the way for Citizens' Assembly. Or just tell the people about, you know, those concepts of mass participation and non-violence.
Yeah, well, you know, it's not that complicated, right? When people get mad, they go on the streets, and when people go on the streets, governments react, right? It's not some really sophisticated academic theory. I mean, some people call it a theory of change. Like I prefer to call it like pretty obvious.
Roger, we're in Northern Ireland here, so people are going on the streets for years here just for
exactly
reasons.
It's not, you know, it's not like people in Northern Ireland don't know what this involves. You know, the point is that there's a way of doing it well and there's a way of doing it badly. And there's, you know, endless research now that confirms that if you're going to bring about progressive political change, then you do need people to go on the streets, but you need them to remain non-violent. Because if people tend towards violence, then you get a corrupt and more macho and degenerative structure within a movement. And what that means is you end up excluding people, particularly women and older people and young people, because it tends to be a young man's affair. Right. So I'm not making a moral judgment here about, you know, whether the circumstances where you use violence or not. I'm just pointing out sociologically that it's a bit of a bummer, right? It doesn't really work. And what does work, according to the research, is high participation civil disobedience. So in other words, you need loads of people to be taking action. And that's the big problem with sort of violent movements is with a non-violent demonstration, at the end of the day, you go down to central Belfast on a Saturday and you don't need any training, you don't need any special contacts, you don't need to be risking your life or whatever, right? You just turn up. So the beauty of that sort of action is loads of people take part. So think of it as there's two dimensions. One of it is lots of people taking part. So that's one thing you want. And then the other side of the equation is you want them to be doing full-on stuff, right? So as I said, if you're just going down to Belfast and waving flags, to be perfectly honest with you, nothing's going to change, right? Unless 20% of Northern Ireland are doing it, which is pretty, difficult to put it bluntly. So what you want those people to be doing in terms of creating political change is breaking the law in a non-violent civil disobedience way. That broadly means like sitting in the road or gluing yourself to buildings or putting paint on buildings or such like, or, people go on hunger strike and things like that. And what that does, and again, I'm not making some massive moral judgment about it. What that does is it's massively effective in creating attention. So for 30 years, as you know, like the climate movement was getting nowhere, let's be honest, right? Emissions went up by 60%, a few thousand people got together every now and again, but, to have a little march, people would have a one-day march, nothing was happening, right? It was just going worse and worse and worse. And what happened in April 2019 was 1,200 people, well, about 10,000 people went to London. We stayed there for 12 days and 1,200 people got arrested, which was the biggest act of civil disobedience in British history. And the important thing to understand about this is once you do something like that, it's non-linear. You go from no one gives a damn to everyone wants to know about you, right? Mm-hmm. This was global news. It was on the front page of the Times. We were talking to the political leaders. It's suddenly like serious. And why is that? Is because you've got lots of people, number one, doing stuff. And number two, you're breaking the law. Breaking the law gets attention. It creates disruption and it forces the people who are opposed to you to come and talk to you. And, it's a bit like a labor strike. It's not like always going to work, but everyone knows the best way for workers to get a pay rise is not to go and talk nicely to the boss. It's to go on strike, right? And, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And of course, it works most effectively the more people do it. It's exactly the same in civil disobedience. You want lots of people and you want them to be staying there for 10 days, a fortnight in a city and basically not moving. And you see this all the time, right? All around the world. You've seen it in Black Lives Matter. You've seen it in the French uprising stuff in 2018. You've seen it in all around the world, Sudan, Armenia. If you study world affairs, it's happening all the time, right? I've seen it in Hong Kong. It doesn't always work, but it's the best playbook, right, that we've got. That's the situation.
So Roger, I've seen you talking about movements, historical movements like Gandhi's March and the civil rights movement and stuff. Do you see the climate change movement building momentum in the same way in the next few years?
Yeah, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants here, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like, it wasn't like I was at King's College going, why don't we break the law? That sounds like a good idea. It's like it's been there. It's been, all I've done is basically reminded people of our own heritage, right? British people have been breaking the law about injustice for hundreds of years. It's just that for 2 or 3 decades, we pretended everything was okay and we could just give £5 to Greenpeace and everything would be fine. The wider historical, arc, as it were, every 20, 30 years, there's a major crisis and people have to risk their lives to save the common good. That's what history is in terms of what ordinary people have to go through. So we're just here again. And what Gandhi and Martin Luther King did, of course, is they perfected this amazing new way of making political change happen. Because before then you had two alternatives, you just go and petition your landlord or something, or you go around shooting people. Those were the two ways of getting things done. And they had their pros and cons, you know. But what Gandhi and Martin Luther King did is basically got the best of both worlds. They got the peacefulness and the respect of doing conventional lobbying, but they got the power of disruption without engaging in violence. So, you know, one of the big bucks which is written about Gandhi, and Gandhi, you know, it's important people realize Gandhi and Martin Luther King, they were hardcore guys, right? You know, they were risking death. This wasn't some sort of pretty, let's sit down in a road for a day or two. These were serious people. And one of the main books about Gandhi in the 1950s was called War Without Violence. So that's basically what we're looking at here. You know, a lot of people have this very airy-fairy idea of non-violence. It's not. It's a form of confrontation. It's a war without violence. It's basically what people do when they feel like their basic values are being violated, right? Their basic beliefs are being violated. And if our basic beliefs aren't being violated by the prospect of destroying, you know, our society for the next 10,000 years, God knows what violation is, you know, looks like. You see what I mean? If there's anything that's justified mass civil disobedience, this is what it is. And of course, what happens with civil disobedience is it forces society to confront its contradictions. And this is what in some ways makes it similar to the civil rights movement. Because in 1961, Martin Luther King was the most unpopular man in America, right? He's even more unpopular than me. Yeah, he was causing real trouble. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just like way below Martin Luther King, obviously. But the point is being unpopular is the deal, right? Because what you're doing, what you're saying to society is, you know, you're being a twat. You say you believe in being nice to everyone, and then you're really shitty to black people. It's just a massive contradiction. And over those confrontations and thousands of people going to prison, it became the main view, as it were, which is everyone should be treated equally, and laws need to be enacted to make sure it happens, right? I mean, no one's pretending racism didn't go away, but at the same time, there was significant legislative improvement. So in many ways, it's really similar to climate change situation, because everyone in the country is going, yeah, you know, I want to look after my kids. I want the country to carry on. You know, I want the future to be okay. And then their government's churning this poison into the air and destroying everything. Now, if that's not a contradiction, I don't know what is. And so what mass civil disobedience does is says to the society you're in, yeah, you know, you can't get to work this morning, but basically it's going to be 10,000 times worse in 10 years' time. You're not even going to have a car, right? You're not going to have a job. Wake up, you know. And then it makes people think, and then they think, yeah, fair enough. You know, maybe I'm going to go to work late this morning, but this needs sorting out. And then you get that big change in society. And before Extinction Rebellion came along, you know, I don't know what it was, something like 10 or 20% of people were concerned about climate. And now it's 80%. There's been a sea change. You know, you talk to anyone in the street and they sort of know it's really bad, don't they? You know, you sense it because you can see it in the politicians' eyes when they're trying to lie to you. We know something's going on, and people aren't stupid. They can sense this. And what Extinction Rebellion is doing, of course, and similar movements is saying, don't just sit there. This isn't the time to sit there, because with this, we don't have the time. You know, like slavery was really bad. Everyone knows now slavery is really bad, right? You know, obscene. But the fact of the matter is, if you didn't sort out slavery this year, it'd be much the same and still obscene next year. But it wasn't like 10 times worse. The thing about the climate, and this is the main thing I'm trying to communicate to you and your audience, right, is this is not going to stay the same. It's going to get exponentially worse. So in 5-10 years' time, there's nothing that's going to save your children from destruction, you know. And maybe we haven't got that much time anyway. I mean, it could well be over already, you know, or maybe we've got another 5 years. I mean, who gives a damn? It's like all hands on deck, right? Yeah. Because we just don't have the time. That's the situation.
So it's like minor inconvenience now, relatively minor inconvenience of disruption now to avoid an almighty inconvenience in a few years' time. That's what you're saying.
That's the argument. You know, when there's no point pretending people aren't pissed off with you, and they've got every right to be pissed off with you, right? But the point you're making is the reason why we're entering into civil disobedience and getting arrested and potentially going to prison is because this is objectively bad, and we need to respond to it. And that's part of the democratic tradition, right? You know, I say to people, if you want to be in a society where there's no disruption, then, you know, go to a totalitarian country, right? A democracy involves disruption. Let people get upset, and we have freedom to get upset, and we have freedoms to disrupt each other. And as long as you're saying, I take responsibility for your actions, people generally respect that. You know, if you went and did some, you know, civil disobedience isn't about going and firebombing a building and then running off and hiding, right? No one respects that. But if you stand up for what's right and you go to court and you say, this is what I believe, even if people disagree with you, they're going to go, well, you know, that guy's got guts, and maybe he's got something important to say. And then 3 months down the line, they might be going, well, I don't really like what he did, but actually he's right. You know, a lot of people, right? You see how it works. And then suddenly society becomes more attuned to the idea that this is a damn emergency, and everyone needs to demand of the government, you know, that massive change needs to happen. And that's the point at which we're going to head towards in the next 5 years with a bit of luck. That's the plan.
Hard to argue with.
I find this both incredibly terrifying and fascinating, but something I want to quote you as saying, there's no escape from moral responsibility. You just elaborate on that.
Sorry, you've got a bit of echo, so I'm desperately trying to say it a bit slower.
There's no escape from moral responsibility.
Yeah.
Something that you said. Just if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think this is a key sort of concluding point, right? Because a lot of people, you know, a lot of people might be listening to this and going, okay, so Roger Hallam's on the show going, all right, you've got to go in the street and that's going to lead to arrest. And what you're thinking is you're sitting on the settee going, okay, so I can sit on the settee and have a sort of okay time and okay life, or I can go put myself in harm's way. And I'm thinking, well, I don't really want to do that, right? Mm-hmm. So the point that I'm trying to communicate is the days of sitting on the settee and watching Netflix and being okay are going anyway, right? Yeah. That's the realization. It's not a point of going, hey, I need to put myself in harm's way, or I can just have a nice life. Your nice life is going. And I'm not saying that because, you know, I hope I've convinced of some evangelical, obsessive, you know, sort of doomster, right? I'm a pretty average guy. I grow vegetables, right? All I'm saying is look at the damn facts, right? Yeah. Look at the facts, grow up and look at the facts, right? That's what an adult is. You know, that's what a fully grown person is, that the ability to look at facts and not pretend they don't exist. And we all know what happens if you start deluding yourself, right? You know, if you're a small businessman like me, if you don't look at the bottom line, no one's coming to save you, right? You go bankrupt. It's exactly the same. If you don't sort the climate out, the climate will destroy society. That's what's going to happen. So if you watch something called the Children's March, and I encourage everyone to watch it, see what dynamic civil disobedience looks like. It's on YouTube. It's about 40 minutes. Check it out. The Children's March. So in there, basically, this is like thousands of kids who went to the street, and they you know, they all went to jail, but they all had a great time because, you know, they were just going, fuck it, you know, we're just like doing our thing. So they had their toothbrushes and they were singing songs, you know, and all this stuff. Anyway, but there's an interview with, you know, this girl, I think she's about 15, 16. And, you know, there's one of those patronizing white journalist types, you know, going, well, you know, why don't you look after your education, and you don't want to be put yourself in harm's way, and don't you think this is a bit silly, you know, all that sort of question. And she just looks at the interviewer and she says, we're going to get hurt anyway, right? We're going to get hurt anyway. You get it? Mm-hmm. So what
bit like the BBC.
Is they're already living in a shitty situation. So it didn't matter if they went to prison for 2 weeks, right? So what we need to understand is our kids and ourselves, and especially our kids, are going to get hurt anyway, right? So it's a question of standing up to minimize that and to get control over society and take it out of the control of the corporate class who are driving us to this destruction, right? Once you've got that in your head, it's a bit like, right, you know, I've got my back against the wall, I've read the facts, I'm going to do my duty, I'm going to step up. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's not like, it's no big deal, is it? At the end of the day, right? You know, you get arrested, you go to court, you get a £300 fine. It's no big shakes in the wider scheme of things, right? Yeah. No, you know, you're not getting thrown into a dungeon and having your fingers pulled off. You know, get a bit of perspective, guys. Yeah, it's all right. You know, given how big it is, and even if you go to prison, you know, I've been to prison quite a few times. You know, it's tough, and it can be really tough for some people some of the time. But at the end of the day, you know, you're in a room, they've locked the door, you're in there for 2 or 3, 4 weeks, right? You know, if you put on remand for doing civil disobedience, you're not going to be in there forever, and then you get out. It's okay. It's not a lot to ask in the wider scheme of things. I mean, anyone will do that for their kids, right? If you said to your kids they're going to be in big harm in 10 years' time, of course you'd go, you know, into a room for a fortnight to sort it out if 1,000 other people are doing it. And that's what we're trying to do at the moment in the UK is, and you can maybe put a link to it, is get an alliance of the willing, like hundreds of people who are going, right, if we all work together like they did in the civil rights movement, and 3 or 4 or 500 people all go to prison at the same time, that's going to be international news. I guarantee it, right? It's going to be as big as April 2019. And that's going to create legislative change. You know, like in the Freedom Riders campaign, and you can see this on YouTube as well, started off with 24 people, and there were 500 people in prison at the end of the campaign. This was to desegregate the coaches and the buses, right, between states. These 500 people doing hard labor in Mississippi, all sorts of people, you know, Jewish leaders and pastors and bus drivers, you know, a total range of people. And when they got to 500 people in prison, that's when they created new legislation because they were embarrassed in it. So if you go to the government and say there's hundreds of people in prison, they're going to start moving, because we don't do that in the UK, right? We don't put hundreds of people in prison for, you know, civil disobedience. People are going to start asking questions, and that's the point at which things start to rock and roll a bit. So it's not that far off, right? So how many people you got?
Roger.
Cliff, how many people have you got listening to the show?
Can you see?
I can't see it at the minute.
1 second, check. Is that like 25 people?
Right, so you need 10 more shows, and then you've got your Northern Ireland contingent.
We had a Northern Ireland contingent over at one of the rebellions. We had our own wee area with tents and all the rest. So when there didn't know what to expect, but it was one of
that's the name of the game, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm aware we are well over time, so I want to
Sorry, I was just rambling on then, wasn't I?
I mean, you can stay all night as far as I'm concerned.
No, that's good. I think I've just got repeating things now.
I want to tell you about this here. People want to know about Burning Pink, and then we need to talk about your film before you go. So,
right, still got more work to do. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, I'll try and be fairly quick. Yeah, so Burning Pink has been set up as a complement, as you might say, to Extinction Rebellion, in the sense that it believes that we should stand in elections to vote out the politicians that are destroying the future, or at least put them under pressure. So one of the things people started doing in other countries is standing in elections, and you know you're not going to win, but you basically stand in election as a direct action. You know, it's like it's to get it out there, to get the message out there, because for most people they don't really take much notice of politics, as you know, but they do during an election. So if you're in a debate or you're on the telly, you can sort of bang out that the situation's beyond bad, and that starts getting the word out. So what Burning Pink is doing that, but putting candidates up in order to create citizens' assemblies. So the core idea is, it's not like, hey, we're voting for Roger and then he's going to go all weird on us once he gets rich and famous, in Parliament, right? It's more like, okay, we're voting for Roger or we're voting for Cliff. And then once you get voted in, then you say, right, we're going to have a citizens' assembly, on pollution in Belfast, right? And then you have a citizens' assembly on it, or a big people's assembly, and they decide over, people dying of cancer and everything, and they want something done. And then you go into the council, and you basically give the council an ultimatum, and you say, this is what the people of Belfast want, right? They don't want to be dominated by the global companies saying you just have to be put up with pollution. They want pollution sorted. And when all the conventional politicians go, oh, well, that's the way the world works, you go, no, it doesn't. And you glue yourself to the desk or get dragged out. Right? You see what I mean? So it's like bringing civil disobedience into that stuffy, elite, bureaucratic, half-dead world of conventional politics, and just having a bit of fun. So we've got a candidate called Valerie Brown. She's a black woman who came over from Ghana when she was a kid, and she's super duper, and she's going to stand for London mayor. So yeah, it's going to be great fun. So if someone wants to stand for mayor, let me know. Because it's just a big chance, isn't it? It's a big chance to just say politics is a load of bollocks. Let's let the people decide, right? Most people know that. I mean, so we'll see how that goes, but it's that's the idea. And I'll give you a link or something. You put it on the board.
Yeah, we'll put it in the comments.
What was the other thing? The other thing was trouble.
Yeah. Do you maybe want to say a bit about that first, and then we'll show the trailer, or should we watch the trailer first?
Yeah, we'll just watch the trailer, I suppose, and then you can ask me about it. Yeah,
and then we'll let you go, Roger.
Yeah.
Hopefully this will work. Okay, 1 second.
Yeah, I know, it's a bit scary, isn't it?
This is an ancient story of corruption and then renewal. And what we've got now is like the mother of all archetypes. It's the final reckoning. I mean, I've had literally hundreds of conversations with people where people have said, I knew, and now I'm going to do something. This was the biggest organised act of civil disobedience in British history. The name of the game on winding people up is you've got to wind them up, but not too much. It gets attention. Nothing's going to change without attention.
I mean, I get involved with Parent-Teachers Association and things like that. But I don't do anything like this.
You have these set roles and people say, no, I'm a parent, I can't do it. No, I'm a filmmaker, I can't do it. The truly horrific thing about the climate catastrophe is you don't need to do anything for it to happen. Business as usual equals extinction.
It's about all the types of injustice, because they're all part and parcel of the same system that is holding us locked into this passive oppression.
All this misery around activism, it's not, right? Once you've made this transition, it's like an act of service, it's an act of joy, it's an act of being who you are at last.
During this journey, I've discovered depths of strength in me that I had no idea existed.
The essence of what is human is the ability to make a decision on what is right in life, regardless of the consequences. And if a critical mass of people do that, then you get what might be called a great awakening.
Fascinating. We watched it the other night together. It's so powerful, man. The thing that resonated with me so much is the concept of sacrifice.
and how you can go from a place of feeling powerless to making a sacrifice and tapping into your power. Like you could probably never imagine before if you had no stay within the confines of the comfort zone.
Yeah. I mean, like most sort of media about activists and all that really winds me up. Because it's so moralistic and there's these weirdo people and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really like, as far as Extinction Rebellion is concerned, for the first time in decades, it's brought ordinary people out on the street, and they don't need to, they don't need to have the right hairstyle or the right attitudes or, and all that stuff, right? It's a universal horror, and so it brings out lots of different people, and I think that's because the horror is so great. There is a sort of awakening moment when you realise this is what you have to do, and then you enter into community with other people to do it. And the paradox here is you're a lot happier than you were before, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to get across, partially in the film, is this: the hard option is to stay in denial, right? That's the hard option here, is just to continually pretend something doesn't exist, and in our spiritual traditions, if you're living a lie, then it rots your soul, right? And the modern translation of that is, if you're stressed and full of anxiety, then you become mentally ill, right, and physically ill. That's the secular version of it. And what Extinction Rebellion enables people to do is to make that transition into a resistance situation. And once you're there, I mean, obviously life's not going to be all hunky-dory. I'm not pretending it is for a minute, but you've got an inner calmness because you know what you're doing for the rest of your life. This has to be done. This isn't a little thing. It's a central thing in your life, the central thing, and then you're on your way, right? You know why you're on this planet. You know what you're doing when you get up in the morning is, this is so overwhelmingly bad that you have to dedicate your life to it, and that produces a wholeness, and that's to be recognised. And you see that a lot, as I'm sure you know.
I can vouch for that, Roger. Like I say, we were at the Hallam Rebellion. Some of our friends were arrested, and I actually felt an immense sense of pride watching people sacrifice themselves for a cause like that, and even just to be part of and be there and watch the police come through, and people just lie on the road and say, no, we've had enough now. And it probably was one of the best times of my life. It gives you a feeling of fulfillment, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I know it sounds a bit like weird, but it's true. Like, lots of people, and I'm not exaggerating, lots of people came up to me and said, that was the best 2 weeks of my life, Roger. And the funny thing was, I was half expecting them to come up and give me a sort of bill for the money they got on the road, and I was going, oh, sorry about that. But, it is good to know. And it seriously speaking, that film still makes me want to cry, because I just feel so humbled by all these people showing how beautiful human beings can be. Because we're just piled high with the shit of how nasty people are with each other, right? And then you suddenly realize people can stand up and be beautiful, and it makes me really emotional. It makes lots of people really emotional. It's something profoundly beautiful about it. So that's it, really, isn't it? That's what we're about going forward.
And if anybody who's still watching, we watched the film the other night, and I recommend you go and watch it. I think you can download it, Roger, for 3 or 4 quid. It's amazing, really, really uplifting and brilliant to watch.
Can't lie. It makes me, consider going out and doing something quite radical. So I think it does the job. Anyway.
Are we going now?
That's the plan. Get him to sign in blood now before he goes back off and watches his Netflix series.
He's going to tell me the plan when we finish here, what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So, Roger, I just want to thank you for giving up your time and coming on here this evening and talking to us and edifying everybody with information that everybody needs to know, because I think a lot of people avoid it, and it's important that they really understand and grasp the enormity of the situation that we're in. So for you to come on here and give up your time and talk to us, man, I cannot thank you enough. It's been amazing.
Well, seriously, it's always an honor, and that sounds a bit weird, but it is. Like I spent 20 years not seeing anyone and just reading carrots. So it's always a bit weird when someone goes, "Oh, we want to interview?" I'm going, "Oh, right, okay." So it's still got that weirdness about it, and I do feel, there's so many amazing people doing amazing things now. I just feel just in service to communicating that message. And I'm really glad to be talking to you guys in Northern Ireland, because I haven't done that yet, so it's great. And Northern Ireland, guys, this is where it could be.
Well, like I told you earlier, people in Northern Ireland know how to go on the streets.
Exactly. But seriously speaking, it's in communities where people traditionally have had a strong sense of right and wrong, where we need to be mobilizing for Extinction Rebellion. And we all know, you can take the right and wrong thing too far. But the biggest problem with society, as you said, is people are just in little bedsits and not caring about the world and themselves, and just in a mess. And it's in the older communities of the Celtic fringe of the British Isles where this is taking off, because people remember what resistance looks like. And this is the new, all-encompassing challenge of our age. So whatever our traditions, it's now or never. That's it, isn't it? So I was going about it now, but yeah, thank you very much. And I'll give you all the bits and pieces on the links.
Yeah, we'll link them up, and this will be available to watch. We'll be downloading it and putting it on YouTube as well, Roger. So once I get it downloaded, I'll fire it across to you somewhere. But again, thank you so much for giving up your time this evening. I have loads of comments here I haven't even got to. Sorry, guys. But everybody from Northern Ireland is saying thank you so much.
The man is blessed.
So guys, for anybody who is still watching, just want to tell you who next week's guest is, if you bear with me 1 wee second. So next Friday night at 7:30, our next guest is this lady, Colleen Patrick Gaudreau. Many of you all know her as the Joyful Vegan. She'll be joining us at 7:30 next Friday night, and some of you already know her, some of you don't, but this lady is absolutely amazing, and I cannot wait to talk to her. So that's our next guest next week.
Thanks everybody for tuning in and sticking with us. This was our first episode, so we're learning as we go. I don't know if my audio, you were sending me my audio is picking up.
You have a little bit of echo, I'm not sure why, but we'll figure that out for next time, guys. Pete, Molly, Nicole, Becky, Brian, sorry I didn't get to your questions. It was supposed to be 45 minutes, but we've gone way over. But yeah, guys, I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next Friday night with Colleen Patrick Gaudreau.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Boom.